I'll say my full name just in case you're wondering about the acronym. It's Cheryl Natasha Elaine Corbin, but I just go by Corbin. And I'm from the University of California, Berkeley, within the Environmental Science Policy and Management Department. We are standing at a pivotal point in human history. More than half of the world's population is now living in cities. Within 2 decades, more than 60% of the world's population will be urban. In the United States, as you can see right here, has already surpassed 80% urbanization. Just to get a better picture about what's going on, this is Chicago in 1972. And this is Chicago in 1997. The red area is the urban area. The green and yellow actually means vegetation, so agricultural lands as well as wildlands or wilderness. This is the Pearl River in southern China in 1979. So 25 years later, just one generation, this is how it looks. The gray area is all urban. The red area is all vegetation. We're growing at an enormous rate as far as cities. China, again, this is the Pearl River, is about to combine 9 cities. This is going to be the first time that you're going to see a 44 million person population within the city. This is a super mega city. Most mega cities are just 10 million or more. To combat this urbanization, what's going on is that the UN has proposed a Green City Initiatives or the Green City Accords. Within the United States, municipal areas are looking at policies to combat pavement, and so we're looking at impermeable pavement, which actually causes the city to get hot. It prevents water to getting to the water table, and it's actually causing a situation of suppressed nature. One of the major policies going forward is the creation of green spaces, so parks and gardens. But we need to think about these considerations a little bit more closely when we're starting to construct them. There's been a proliferation of green spaces within the United States. So I want to look at these 3 points: function, social context, as well as accessibility. So function. As you see this photo right here, you have old growth trees. What these trees do, the tree canopy actually cools down the urban landscape by casting a shadow. What it also does is that it cleans the air. So CO2 as well as pollution is being absorbed through these trees within this urban landscape. Another thing that we're dealing with is stormwater runoffs as well as flooding. And this is a situation where, because of the pavement, water is not being absorbed, it's collecting and running off the city. So it's actually creating a slick surface, and we're actually losing water. Another function, this is the Rooftop Garden in Chicago, and this is the municipal city's urban situation. Within Chicago, we're seeing roofs that can be as hot as 200 degrees, so twice the boiling point. And what we're also seeing within these green spaces, the temperature is actually lowered, so it stays between 80 degrees Celsius. This is the normal or the traditional way of looking at parks, specifically for recreation, for humans. This is a new park that just was opened in Oakland. It's a 4-acre park. It's very much a lawn situation, but it's an open space for people to actually enjoy recreational space within the urban area. What's on the rise within urban landscapes is actually food production. So urban gardens is becoming a huge situation within the urban landscape. This is actually from Atlanta, Georgia. This was once a project that they actually transformed into an urban garden. And as you can see, there's still steps there, a remnant of the situation beforehand. This is in Brooklyn, New York. Again, we're going up on the roof again. This urban farm feeds so many people, but what's interesting, it's actually using a roof. It's cooling the building, and it's actually providing food. So 2 functions. But there's a third function that we haven't really considered within green space considerations. We've been very much focusing on people-centric areas. But my question, and the whole point of this presentation, is questioning, is 21st century conservation up in the air? What about ecosystems creations within this urban landscape, using indigenous or native plants to line the urban landscape on top of buildings? Why would we do this? Have non-peopled areas? Because of these guys. We're experiencing a decrease in pollinators. So it's very important that we take this consideration and bring back nature within the urban landscape and consider the needs for pollinators. They provide food, they actually help us eat better, and more important, they are in danger. So to have a separate place to consider their situation is very important within this understanding of the urban landscape. But how high do you think that these pollinators can fly? This is the tallest building humanly ever built. It has been said, and research shows, that bumblebees can actually fly over Mount Everest. Hummingbirds can go as high as 500 feet and still have no problems getting to these spaces. This is to say that maybe we should reconsider another way of looking at the urban landscape by ecosystem creations. But there's one more thing that we really need to consider, is public access. So is this access going to be public? Is it going to be semi-public? Or is it going to be private? And so I just want to touch on this understanding of public spaces. This is where I grew up. This is Rollingwood Apartments in Silver Spring, Maryland. I started living there when I was 3, and I didn't move out until I was 22. So I lived there the whole time. This is not the typical understanding of a green space or urban situation, because I actually lived in the suburbs. Within Silver Spring, Maryland, there are apartment buildings in suburbs. One thing I also want to say is that public access completely changed my life. My mom was a single mom. She did not have a lot of money. She worked 2 jobs. The Montgomery County school system nurtured me, gave me new ways of seeing the world. Washington, D.C., which I'm so close to, has free museums and art galleries. I've always had access to these spaces because they're free and because they were public. That's probably the only reason why I'm standing here today. Actually, a second-year graduate student getting my PhD at UC Berkeley, another public institution. So it's very important that we consider public spaces as not only this idea of recreation, but always this idea of we can actually change children's lives and people's lives by having this public access. So Rock Creek Park is one of the largest urban parks within the United States. And this is actually where I ended up playing as a kid. So more and more, what we're seeing, especially within the Oakland context, is that a lot of these public spaces are becoming private. So I want to say this to you. Really consider, when you're talking about public access and you're talking about green space creation, consider these things linked, because people should not have to pay to enjoy these spaces. This is where I'm living now in Oakland, California. As you can see, it's very different than where I grew up. What's also different about Oakland is that if you want to go to a museum, it costs anywhere from $7 to $14. If you want to go to the zoo, it's going to cost you anywhere from $5 to $17. If you want to enjoy these spaces, you're going to have to pay. So how much of our public and how many of our children are not getting access and not being educated and not being connected to nature because they simply cannot pay to get into these spaces? And this is what I call a semi-public place. You have to pay to get in, but it's public. But if you don't have the money to get in, it might as well be a private space. Again, we need to reimagine the urban landscape. The urban landscape was nature before, and it still exists within the urban landscape. As you can see, even a sunflower can find a place to bloom in the urban landscape, and nature is actually reclaiming it in different ways and breaking through pavement. One of the most important books to me is Nature's Metropolis. This is a great book for anybody to read, and it talks about Chicago, which was once a natural space. But through consumption, the city was actually built by this nature. But again, we have to understand that nature is not absent from the city. It's always there, but we have to not suppress it through pavement. So I have the 3 G's of green space and park creations within the urban environment. Green as we grow, that means everybody. Green where we are, that means every neighborhood should be able to participate in the greening and bringing nature back to their neighborhood. And another point, get away from the gray. The worst thing that we can do is have more paved spaces. They only cause urban heat island effect, again, making the urban environment hotter. It stops water from getting to the water table, and it actually causes flood events. So when we start looking at this possibility of conservation going up in the air, one thing that we have to also consider within the proliferation of urban gardening or within the creation of green spaces is this sustainable? Have you considered this option? How much water do we spend to keep these spaces green? This is what the EPA says. Just on private lawns alone, we lose 50% of water from overwatering. It goes right on the pavement, slicks off into sewers, and we lose water. What about water harvesting for these spaces? What about municipal water catchment systems? At this time, it's a private endeavor in which only houses can do this. But could you imagine if we can harvest water and keep these spaces green and stop pouring good drinking water on the ground? Why don't we think about scaling it up? Right now, this is the oil pipeline connection within the United States. What happens if this was water? California is actually experiencing a drought right now, but other places are getting overwatered. Imagine if we can switch the water from one area to the other, especially in a place like California that actually creates most of the US food system at this time. So think about it a little bit harder when you're thinking about park creation. We do have a choice. If we continue how we are now, this could be an option. But if we get ourselves together and green as we grow, green where we are, and get away from the gray, this could be a better future for us all. Thank you.